Thank you guys so much for having me here this afternoon. I want to say it's honored, but I think the right way of phrasing it is humbled. I'm very humbled to be here. I was in your chairs, well, your proverbial chairs. I did not have nearly as nice of buildings when I came here 20 years ago. And I was trying to think, when I was asked to do this speech, I got the email, and my first thought was, that seems like a lot of work. I'm really busy this fall. How do I get out of it? Stress, I don't really have anything that relevant or interesting to say. And as soon as I started to think about how I could make up an excuse, my computer dinged and there was a note from Heidi Roizen, who's here supporting me in the audience, which literally said, you must do this. And so I realized there was no way I was getting out of it. So I had to be here today and do this presentation. And then I started the daunting task of thinking, what do I want to say? What would I have wanted to hear when I was sitting in your seats 2 decades ago? What would have been useful? And this time I was actually on a vacation, and this is a picture of where I was. I was in Wyoming. It's one of my favorite places in the world. I go there every single summer. And I got a text from my brother. It said, quote, kick-ass hype, you game. I was in a mood of saying yes, so I said, sure, I'm going to give this speech, and I'll go on this hike. And as I started on this hike and this journey, and I thought this would be a good day to prepare for the fall and honestly think about what I was going to talk about. I started to really see this as a metaphor for my own experiences over the past 2 decades, but also just a lot of people that I've known, a lot of the successful people, a lot of the entrepreneurs, a lot of the challenges that they faced. So basically, I'm going to take you through this hike. It's a behind-the-scenes reality of what that experience was and kind of layering how that's relevant for me. If I have any hope for today, it's that there's something in this presentation, some nugget of advice that is either aspirational or comforting for you over the next 2 decades of your life. So who am I? The intros always sound great. Emily Melton. I'm 42 years old. I was the oldest of 6 kids. I grew up in Utah. My mother grew up on a mink ranch, and my dad grew up on a chicken farm. And they moved to Salt Lake to get out of their farming community. My mom did go to college, but she was told by her college counselor that the only school that was really relevant for her was beauty school. And so both of my parents had a very, very strong belief in education and a very, very strong belief that I needed to leave Utah. And that was the one thing. They didn't care where I went to school. They kind of cared. But they really it had to be outside of Utah. And when I started to show some academic progress or promise, my dad bought me a Harvard sweatshirt. And I spent the next couple of years trying to convince him that Stanford was the Harvard of the West. Now, for you guys, I think we all know that Harvard is the Stanford of the East. So it's a much easier pitch. But I was grateful enough to get to come here. Undergrad, 2000, and the GSB in 2005. I'm now one of 5 general partners at DFJ, which is a 35-year-old venture capital firm. And as was mentioned earlier, I spent a lot of my time investing in consumer marketplaces. I was an early board member, an investor in Redfin, an online real estate transaction platform. I'm on the board of a company called Shift, which is a used car marketplace. And I also spent a lot of time in healthcare, and pretty broadly, healthcare IT services, mobile technologies, and more recently looking at AI and ML and how those can transform diagnostics and drug discovery. So the simplicity, or the simple way of saying it, I like big, hairy problems that are complex, and I really love really passionate people that are working to solve those problems. So we're going to talk about a hike, and this is where you get the person comes up here, the proverbial successful person, and tells you you're going to go on a hike, and this is what you want to vision, right? You think it's going to be someone who's really successful. This woman looks like someone who can scale a really big, a big mountain and do it without breaking sweat, simply. The reality is this is the person who hiked up the hill. And we don't have to say exactly how many pounds over that previous picture, but many, and many pounds over from when I sat in those chairs. I was not the kind of person who was in really good physical shape to go on the kind of hike. I wasn't necessarily thinking that this was going to be something that I was capable of doing. And I think that's really important. When I think about a venture capitalist, when I started, I was political science and philosophy undergrad here. I thought I was going to go to law school because I thought, if you're successful, you get into a good college, you're either a lawyer and a doctor. Didn't really like blood, so I'll go be a lawyer. I applied, had some success getting into law schools, but needed to make some money or wanted to make some money before taking on more debt. Started working in a law practice and hated it. And it was 99, 2000, and I started getting all these job offers because it was crazy, and they were just literally trying to hire everybody. And I remember both being humbled by the job offers and very confused on how these companies could pay me so much money and why they wanted me. And I remember I sat down with one of the CEOs who had offered me to join his company in corp dev. And I thought, I'm not a business person, but I'm gonna ask the business questions, right? Let's spend time on the business. Like, what are your profits? Well, we don't have profits. What are your revenues? We don't have revenues. I was like, how do you have money to pay me? Like, how on earth are you running this? He said, well, we get money from venture capitalists. So I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't been spending time in a lot of these rooms. I didn't really fully understand the VC industry, but I realized for me to make a good decision on the kinds of company I wanted to go work at, I should understand the flow of money. And so through my network, I sent notes to all the VCs at all of the companies that I was interviewing in, and one of them was Tim Draper. He offered to meet with me. Mostly I sweet-talked his assistant, who then made him spend 20 minutes with me. And I came in with a list of questions about the company. And I started with a question, and he was like, that's a pretty good question. He was like, what you've got there? And I was like, it's a list of questions. He's like, why don't you just go through the whole list? So I went through my list of questions, and at the end of it, he said, those are really good questions. Why don't you just come do that for me? So, do what? He was like, ask companies that come in those questions. That's what we do. We ask them questions, and we decide whether or not we're going to invest. So I remember I left, and I was sitting in the car in the parking lot, and I called my boyfriend, now my husband, and said, I think I just got a job in venture capital. So no one gets a job in venture capital. But sure enough, I got to come back in, meet with more of the partners, and a couple weeks later, I was the first analyst that they had ever hired. So what's the story? This is a woman who shouldn't be hiking up the side of a mountain because she really needs to hit the gym more frequently. This also is not someone who looks like a venture capitalist. I did not look like a venture capitalist at the time. I didn't have the background, I didn't have the experience. Don't let anyone else tell you what you're capable of. Don't let anyone's other's views of what you think a person should be in order to be that successful. It's an unnecessary barrier. We all talk about unconscious bias and how that hurts others, and it's absolutely true. But what's also really important for you to all realize is those biases, those images in your head can hurt yourself. So this is the hike. As I mentioned earlier, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and the Tetons in particular are my happy place. It's where I find peace, and I am happiest when I'm in the Western Mountains. And I wanted to read you the description of the hike. I was asking my brother as we went in, how I knew basically it was about a 15-mile hike. He said it would take about a day. And as I'm driving in, this is actually on the other side. So Wyoming is on the other side of the Tetons. So this is on the Idaho side. This was the description in the trail book that he handed me as we started, driving into the park. It's long and it's strenuous, but if you're in the physical condition and you have the persistence it takes, you will remember it for the rest of your life. It's a hike for which you must work for it and work for your reward, but there will not be a disappointment at the end. So this is as we're driving in. The hike starts kind of at that tree line, and as I pull in, that little, where the arrow is pointing, that kind of flat area, as you look beyond and then you see the Tetons, that's where I'm hiking up to. So what's the point of this? This is kind of like the future, right? I didn't know what I was getting up into. I didn't really understand what this was actually going to mean or what it was going to look like when I went up there. But I had the aspiration to figure out a way to make myself somehow haul my butt up to that place. Goals are really important. Aspirations are really, really important. But you don't know exactly what it's going to be. And so you have to also be very comfortable with uncertainty. It's not going to ever follow the exact path. And when you look forward in the same way that's kind of fuzzy, and it's really challenging to understand exactly what that looks like, you're going to have the same problems. You want to set a big, hairy, ambitious goals, but you have to recognize that it's not going to go exactly as planned. I have the privilege in my job to get to meet with some of the best entrepreneurs and some of the iconic entrepreneurs over the last 2 decades. And the things that they all have in common is he or she comes in with an ambitious and bold goal. They have a vision of the future. And almost in every single one of those instances, it never works out exactly as they planned. That slide deck is not followed. Those financial projections are completely off. But it's that ambition that pushes them forward, that gets them there, that gets them to experience their own levels of success. This is the kind of thing that struck me multiple times throughout the hike, was how the experience kept changing as I was going up. And like that saying, the future, you don't know exactly where you're going. You know, a mile in, the hike looked very different than it did 5 miles in, than it did on the way down. And I kept thinking about the word perspective, and perspective is really relevant in 2 ways. One, it's how what you see is going to change based off of where you are, right? As you move forward, this looks different if I'm heading this way, and in this part of the room, it looks different if I'm in the back of the room. Where you physically are changes how you see the world. And that's one concept, and that was absolutely true of how I experienced this hike. But the other thing is how you see the world changes. And what do I mean by that? Because you change. I am a different person than I was when I was sitting in the proverbial chairs 2 decades ago, and you are all going to change multiple times. I continue to change. The way that I see the world today is very different than even how I saw it just a year ago. And so that's that level of perspective, and that comfort with uncertainty, that where you go and as you move along the journey, your visual field is going to change, your field of opportunity is going to change, but also you're going to change. You're going to become different, and that's okay too. So as soon as we get in on the hike, it actually took us some time to find this because it wasn't particularly well marked. This is the only sign on the entire trail that we saw. So for those that are on the podcast, it basically says, trail not maintained, very steep, not recommended. What a great start, right? So this is kind of, one of the things is you have to be comfortable and commit in digging in. Another thing is these signs are going to appear multiple times in your life. Becoming an entrepreneur is never a rational choice. There's always an easier way to make money or an easier way to find some level of immediate success. Anything worth doing is going to be hard. Anything that gets you to those next levels and gets you to where you want to ultimately be is going to be challenging. And so whether it's actually a physical sign like this or someone who explicitly tells you, you can't be a VC. Emily, you study political science and philosophy. Who the hell do you think you are? Who's going to want your advice? Or it's someone implicitly who just walks out of the room and says, there's nothing really useful for you here. Don't let any of these signs ever stop you. It's not to say that you're going to be successful. It's not to say that it's guaranteed that you will make it to the end, but how the hell are you going to know if you don't even try? The trail was not maintained, and there were multiple times where we were wandering around. And one of the things that you recognize is no journey is the same for every person. So as I'm trying to give you advice, this isn't the checklist of here's how to get to be a successful VC, or here's how to build a successful company, or here's how to do. I hate those. Everybody wakes up at 5 a.m. Everyone somehow works out, meditates, eat well, has great kids, and you read it and you're like, this is impossible. And the reality is that is always impossible. There's no checklist. There's no template for success. In the same way, there's no clear trail that's going to tell you how to get up this hill. Every single one of you is going to have multiple kind of challenges in your own right. Every single one of you's journey is going to be different. But that doesn't mean that you should go in without actually understanding what's happened in the past or who came before you. Whenever I have an entrepreneur come and pitch me, and they always come in really passionate, I'm going to disrupt this industry. Well, that's great. Why hasn't it happened in the past? Who's tried and failed? What did you learn from those lessons? That's not to say that because it has failed in the past, it's going to fail in the future, but not actually taking the time to understand what has happened in the past is putting you at risk for the future. So as we're hiking up this trail, I don't know if you guys see these stack of rocks. Any of you guys know what those are called? Cairns? So cairns are where you put a stack of rock as you're walking up the hill, and if the trail is not well marked, people put cairns. So the people who come before you put those as markers, so when you don't know where to go, you can kind of look out and follow some kind of a path. This to me is like the mentors. People in your life who've been there before. The trail is going to be different. Conditions have changed. Snow, wind, rain can knock these things over, or it doesn't. They're going to have they will have had a different experience going up or down, but it's still helpful to see and leave those marks. And so seek advice, seek mentors. If there's one regret that I have, I wasn't good enough about seeking mentors early on in my career. Because there's so many mistakes that you can avoid by just asking people for help along the way. And the other big piece, and one thing I'm more proud of as I've gotten to a certain age, is that you leave them for the others as they come down. Pay it forward. No, there was times where we ended up on a very different path, and with our, we actually had a GPS and navigation. We managed to get back onto the right place, but we went back, and it took us about an hour, but to leave the cairns for the others coming behind us, because we recognized that it was going to be really challenging if we didn't actually leave some markers. So we hiked up that face trail, and the face trail is essentially 2 miles straight up. It felt like 90 degrees. I'm just going to say it was like this. It certainly felt like that for me. I was bred, I was exhausted, and you come around a bend and you start to see this trail. And it looks, the trail's out ahead of you, and I can see Table Rock on the future, and I am thinking, as my daughter likes to say, easy peasy. Like, okay, I've got this. The worst is behind me, and now I'm going to be able to move forward, and it looks accessible. It looks like something, I can almost touch it, right? That perspective has changed, but it's close enough, I can almost touch it. This is very true of professional careers, and I don't know how many of you read Angela Duckworth or Grit and different. The first trajectories of any kind of learning a new skill, getting into a profession, it's the steepest. It's also the most kind of thrilling, because you're just moving forward. You're putting it all out. You're giving it all to just getting to that next level of success. And then you hit a point where it often feels like a plateau. And this, where you think it's actually the good part, is actually one of the most dangerous parts of any journey or any professional trajectory. And that's because you want things to be easy. You think because you've gotten to a certain point that you deserve it. You can see it, it should happen. And oftentimes people don't actually push themselves beyond it. So you can see there's like a little dark kind of blip in that has an arrow. It was about a mile of this. That little blip in the distance you couldn't actually see. There was no trail. It was completely just a rocks, and every single step was one where you could sprain your ankle. It wasn't as treacherous as the climb. It wasn't as physically exhausting, right? But it was a slog. And you felt that phase seemed to take forever because you did not feel like you were moving forward. This is something that happens pretty frequently in life, and it's really hard. And sometimes you just have to remember that even though it feels like a slog and you don't feel like you're making nearly as much progress as you would, you're putting it out there, but it's just one step in front of the other, just remember forward momentum. It's okay. And in the same way that you couldn't see from that slide before, it didn't look like there was a challenge. This is oftentimes what I see with a lot of the companies that I'm involved in, is they go through the scaling thing. They've raised tons of money. They have great board of directors. They've got revenues. And everyone from the outside thinks this is easy peasy. It's just going to be a path. And scaling businesses, hiring lots of employees, the problems become different. The problems become a different kind of complexity, and it's not as sexy, it's not as fun, and it feels like a slog. And it's hard because from the outside, everyone thinks you should do is racing up to the top of the mountain, but you've been slowed down. So when you hit one of those periods of your life, and you will get through the rock field. It is possible, but take time. Don't sprain an ankle. Then there's other kinds of challenges. So getting up to that very, very edge of Table Rock was essentially, there was no trail. It was just free form climbing straight up the hill. And this, sometimes the rock field is possible. There's nothing, you know you can get through it. It's just going to be a grind. It's slog. It's not fun. There are other phases where you're not sure you're actually going to be able to make it. It doesn't seem physically possible. It doesn't seem mentally possible. It seems like everything is stacked against you. You have companies that can't raise a round of capital. You have companies where their largest customer suddenly quits. You have friends that get sick. That's something as you get older in life, you start to have different kind of complexities, different kind of challenges. And one of the things I've seen over and over is that you just have to recognize that you're going to do the best you can going up this, and you're going to get hurt and bruised along the way. I got some pretty nasty bruises. I got a really nice gash trying to make my way up this. And I had my brother, who was an amazing support person for me, pulling me and trying to get there and getting some of the rope set so it wouldn't be quite as challenging. But some of those times are going to happen, and you just have to give it all you can to get through it. So this is what it ends up when you look like. And I don't know how many of you guys care about the mountains, but this was one of the favorite things I've seen. It was just absolutely gorgeous. But But you're also, and this is in the purview, you get up to this Table Rock and you look around and you feel a sense of accomplishment and I'm happy. And then I look around and I recognize there are all of these other peaks around me. They are all higher. I have just worked my ass off and there's still a lot of other cooler places to go that even have better views. And that's one of the hardest things about going through these journeys is once you actually get, again, that perspective, once you get to one point, you just get a different purview. And you start to even open up broader and broader possibilities of what's possible. I know a lot of really, really successful people. I've got the privilege in the last 2 decades to get to know many people on different stages of their journeys. And one of the travesties is knowing these extremely successful people who end up being so deeply, deeply unhappy. And one of the things you constantly see that is there is that they can't take the moment to both enjoy their success and still be excited by the challenges of climbing those other peaks. And that's the duopoly that you're going to have to get comfortable with as you think through it, is that you want to celebrate the hard work. You want to celebrate when you have these moments and you get to those peaks, but you also have to recognize there's going to be valleys and other peaks ahead of it, and that's okay too. Don't get too daunted if it isn't. You're not ever going to be on the highest peak in the world. You're not ever going to be the most successful person in the world and stay there. You can have those moments and be happy, but also recognize there's other challenges ahead. How many of you guys are on Instagram? I don't know, is that still cool? Some, not many. One of the things that I find really daunting in this current environment is how much we get inundated, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, whatever the current mode is, with the highlight reel. Right, so this was the picture I took. This is what got posted on Instagram, right? Yay, look at me, I am so awesome. I'm at the top of this mountain. There wasn't a picture of me red-faced and panting. There wasn't a picture of my brother just doing everything possible to try to pull my fat butt up the side of the hill. None of those will make it to the glory shots, but this one does. And so I think it's really important as you guys think about, particularly as you're inundated with more and more of those highlight reels, more and more of those pictures of people coming in, is recognizing that for every accomplishment, for every one of those moments that you want to enjoy in the peak, there's an enormous amount of there's the behind the scenes. There were other challenges. There were a lot of ugly things that often had to happen to make something look pretty. This is even no more true than it is, and I see this over business. So I mentioned that I was on the board of Redfin. And in professional successes, you tend to see the person when they're on the cover of the magazine, or we celebrate these moments, right? So this was when Redfin went public about 2 years ago. And everyone is smiling and beaming, and it looks like a 10-year overnight success, right? Obvious, great founder, everyone's high-fiving each other. Also, everyone wants to be in this picture. Those moments of success, that's where everybody comes out of the woodwork and wants to be right by your side with a big smile. I invested in the company in 2007. 2008, we had the financial crisis. The real estate market completely tanked. No one who wanted to buy a home could get a loan. And those people that did want to sell a home on our platform, the prices were 30 to 40% lower. We had to get a board meeting about a year and a half into the investment, where I sat with the friendly, smiley guy, Glenn Kelman, in the middle, who was shaking and trying to hold back tears because we had to lay off 20% of the company. It was critical to be able to get the company through this phase. We knew the revenues were going to slow. We knew that we needed to make the money last a little bit longer. But he had hired those people. He had told those individuals that he was going to do everything possible to ensure the success of his company. And he felt deeply conflicted and like a failure that he hadn't been able to live up to that promise. That's not a moment where you whip out your camera and say, hey, geez, I want to take this and remember this in the dark times, right? Those moments aren't captured, and oftentimes those moments aren't even told. But for any of those glory moments that you see, you have multiple stories like that in the background. And what you need to do is recognize that sometimes those people that surround you, you want to celebrate the glory moments, and it's okay to have those people come, but make sure that the people who are with you when the times are really, really tough are also there. Because those are the true people that you really need by your side. Those are the ones that know what it took for you to get there and are going to understand who you are and who you had to become in order to have that kind of success. So I get up there and you think, yay, I'm done, and I'm not. It's actually a shorter hike up than it is to go down. And that was so it really was just starting. I wasn't even halfway done with the day. And that is one of the really important things to recognize, is that you start these things and you're just beginning. Anytime you think you have a moment of success or you think you've reached something, there's always another place to go. I call this the if only phenomenon. And my husband and I ended up going through a phase where we started to ban if only. If only I get into Stanford, everything will be okay. If only I could get a job at this firm, then things will be better. If only I could make this amount of money, then life would totally change. And what we've realized is we had our if only, and as soon as you go past them, you realize there was a whole new set of if onlys, and there was never that moment where you felt fully relieved. Now, obviously, when you don't have to worry about making rent, those are free. There are some basic things that make life easier. I don't want to take away from that. But these if onlys, that thinking that there's a magical place or a magical accomplishment will somehow transform everything, it just doesn't exist. The other thing that's really interesting is that going down was a very different physical phenomenon. You think it's really challenging to go up, and it is. It's an exertion. You are going everything you can to try to climb that hill. And then you get there and you start heading down, and you're no longer fighting gravity, right? Gravity is now your friend. But that weight had a whole new set of problems, right? That hurt your knees and my hips, and it was really treacherous, because if you fall on the way down, you don't just kind of fall forward and catch yourself, you go rolling, right? And I sometimes feel like success is this for people. It's gravity, so it's a little bit, it should make it easier, right? Like you've actually gotten there, you have gravity on your side, but it can also be a real burden and strain, and sometimes the implications of that become even bigger. When you get to a point you think gravity, you think I can just fly down. And that never really works. You still have to be methodical. In some ways, you almost have to slow down and be even more careful and make sure you even have better trail companions to hold your hand so you don't stumble and fall, because that fall is the one that could really do you in. When I see different people on different trajectories of success, one of the most important things is keeping that feedback loop. Making sure there are people that keep them honest. There's actually been a study that was done, the Atlantic wrote a great article about it, that basically showed that people with power can sometimes experience something that's relative to mental illness, where power actually has a thing to physically change your mind. And I was telling this to a friend, and she said, yeah, well, of course, like the only people who throw tantrums are 3-year-olds and billionaires. 3-year-olds because they're pushing the limits to see and get told no, and billionaires because no one ever tells them no anymore, so they lose that idea of how to actually control themselves. And so when you think about that weight, you get to different phases of your life, sometimes it's equally important to make sure that you have those people who say no, because as you're going down, if you're like, I could run down the hill, like I'm this great person, people say, yeah, sure. You get a lot of yes people. You get a lot of sycophants who want to tell you what you think you want to hear, and it's really, really critical in those moments to make sure that you have the right people by you who are keeping you honest, who tell you when to slow down so you don't actually take that deep stumble down the hill. So this is the same kind of thing we keep talking about, is that it's the peaks and valleys. And that's, you always have to dig down deep and start to think about where you want to go next. Recognize that life, it's long, but it's also short. And so you really want to think about how you can enjoy, the different stages of it. We went through this hike, and as I came down, I was struck at how that last portion of the hike had some of the most beautiful parts of it, because I actually took some time to look, and I could. On the way up, I took no photos, other than that trail sign. And on the way down, I took multiple photos, and I will spare you of those. But there was a mama moose and a baby moose. There was baby bears climbing up. There was, these amazing mountain ridges, and you can't even capture the glory of these wildflowers there were just fields and fields of wildflowers. And it was the same, this was the same area, but I actually took the time to step back and enjoy some of it, and then start to think about where I would go next. So here's some of the kind of takeaways, if you will. Use the trail as your guide. It's a guide, but it's not guardrails. Again, the trail changes daily based off of the conditions. Every single one of you will have your own journey. You'll have your own challenges, your own opportunities. But take the time to kind of see how others have gone before you, learn from their lessons, listen to some of that perspective, because it could help make your journey a little bit better. Choose your trail companions wisely. The obvious thing is everyone says, like, who you choose as your life partner. It's more than true. I can honestly say I would not be here without, my husband, but also a couple of really, really important and key friends. And those are the people that are the behind the scenes that don't worry about the highlight reel, and they're not the ones who are liking me on Instagram or retweeting when I have a good moment, but the people that I can have real conversations with, who spend the real time with me. We're really, really bad at visualizing the future. And just in the same way I had no idea what I was going as I saw, that little lump out in the distance. You don't know, you can set aspirations, but you don't know what your future holds. I was talking with a good friend who had dinner with a well-known, I don't have rights to this story, so I will, but billionaire female you all know. And she was talking about how very early on in her career, she went to a successful person's home and sat on the patio to talk about a business deal, and she looked out in his backyard, and there were 8 trees. And she sat there and thought, wow, one day I hope I'm rich enough that I can have a house with a big backyard and get 8 trees. Fast forward many decades later, many homes later, she was at her ranch in Southern California, looking out at her backyard on multiple acres and thought, I have a lot of trees. I wonder how many trees I actually have. So she went and hired someone to go and count the trees. And it was 75,000 trees that were on this property. And so that's what I thought is, like, it's not those bold aspirations, sitting there and saying, what can other people, what does other success look like? Those are good. They're again, those are interesting trails and you can learn from that. But you have no idea what you're really capable of. You don't know what your future can actually hold. And keep that in mind, because it's not fixed. It's not going to happen on a certain timeline. And you can all find your own forests in your own way. And this thing of if I can have one thing I really, really want everyone to take away, because I struggled with this for a long time early on, is don't let anyone else define what you're capable of or tell you what success should look like. A good friend of mine always says, you can't be what you can't see. And that's been a big movement for us. A lot of the female women and the female partners in venture capital are trying to be more prominent, because we realize for us to be able to recruit more women into venture, they need to see that you can be successful as a woman in the industry. And that's all well and good, and that's true. You want to have more prominent people, but I also hope we get to the point where you don't need to see it to believe it. You don't need to see someone else who looks like you or has the same background as you or follow that to believe that you're capable of it. Don't let any sign or any definition of another person's what it takes to be successful to hold you back. So the last little bit, set your sights high, get started, never give up, but the trail and the destination will surprise you.